All right, good morning, everyone. So they told me we're live streaming, so I have to change my presentation style a little bit. So I may go a little bit slower to try to be very peculiar on the words that I use. That's unique for me. My first slide, I wanted to tell you over here on my right, your left, I have, traditionally I bring laminated circulars in. I've got laminated circulars for weed management programs for cold crops, leafy greens, summer squash, sweet potato, and watermelon. You are welcome to grab one, but you need to grab one after the conclusion of this session. They will disappear prior to later sessions today. Also, has nothing to do with vegetables, but if you're a wheat producer and you want one with wheat, I got about 10 or 12 of those left, okay? With that said, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. And I'm gonna take a little bit of a unique approach. I promise we'll talk about label updates, label changes. We got some cool stuff going on. But we need to make sure, at least through my job, that I'm communicating very effectively with some of the challenges that we have. And Stormy has highlighted the most challenging, the Endangered Species Act, that is already here. And it will influence every step of our production practices as we move forward. But I really want to highlight in weed control. You hear a lot about resistance, at least in vegetable production, with insecticides or fungicides. We don't talk a lot about herbicide resistance, really because of the diversity of the programs that you use for weed management. But we are starting to have some problems, and I want to highlight those and highlight some of the regulatory challenges we have before I run into some of the label changes and label updates. So when you look at the world of herbicide resistance, whether you look in the world, you look in the U.S., you look in Georgia, we're on a continual rise that is alarming. And it's alarming because we have no new herbicide modes of action. I was actually just reading something. Between 1950 and 1980, there was a new herbicide mode of action every 2 years. You won't have another herbicide mode of action before I retire, which isn't that far away, but you won't have another herbicide mode of action for a long time. So we don't have new tools coming in, but we're continually losing the tools we have either through regulatory or through resistance. So I want to highlight a couple of concerns that I have for the vegetable growers. If you're a cotton grower, you've been seeing this for a while, and I've been screaming about glyphosate resistance, glufosinate resistance, dicambo resistance. But I want to talk about the PPO herbicide chemistry with you guys because this chemistry is important to every single crop grown in the state of Georgia, and we are starting to run into some problems with some pests that are very problematic for these crops. When we talk about the PPO herbicides, it's really just the way the herbicide controls the weed. The problem is a lot of our tools, and I have a few of them, this is not all of them by any means, but I have a few of those listed on the slide. Obviously, Reflex is a very important one for us. Goal is extremely important. Valor or Chateau is important in a lot of our crops, and I can go on and on and on. Well, we have documented and now we have confirmed that we have a population of pigweed, at least one in the state of Georgia, where we have confirmed resistance. It takes about 3 years to be able to use the R word, resistance, but we have confirmed this, and it's pretty significant and you need to know about it. Whether you're rotating with the agronomic grower or you're using this chemistry in your crops, it's important that you understand. So what I'm showing you, if you'll look here, I'm showing you the level of resistance to a post-emergence application to these pigweeds with Reflex, Cobra, Ultra Blazer, and a product from BASF that's going to come out called Volcaris. That's right, product that's going to come out called Volcaris. And what you see, for example, with Reflex is we have a 227 level of resistance. So if you need a pint of Reflex to kill a normal population, a normal pigweed in a population, at 227 pints you may achieve the same success on this population in the state of Georgia. That's bad, but look at Cobra, right? So the bottom line is you're not going to control this emerged pigweed with the PPO herbicides, which are very common tools that are used in our state. What's even more concerning, I think it's the first time it's been documented, plenty of populations in the U.S. are resistant to this chemistry with post-emergence applications, but this population is also resistant to the residual activity of this chemistry. And that is more concerning and more alarming, at least to me in the crops that I work. So with this one, again, you put Reflex, Valor, Goal, or Volcaris out pre-emergence, And the level of resistance we have varies by chemistry, but you can see it's anywhere from 2 to 31 times. And I think we probably know Valor is, in my opinion, the most effective residual pigweed material that we have. And you can see with this population, we have a resistance level 31 times greater. So again, you're not going to control this entire population in your field. Right? So that's number one. That's the first thing I wanted to point out. And then I wanted to highlight more recent concerns. Somebody tell me, other than my extension agent, somebody tell me what this weed this is. Wild radish, that's exactly right. Is there any field in the state of Georgia that doesn't have it? I cannot find one, right? And this even impacts stormy and diamondback moths, and it has a very unique and dynamic footprint in agriculture. But what we're currently seeing, and has my agents really concerned, and we're going to invest in a significant amount of time, is we're seeing some escapes from the PPO chemistry that aren't making sense. Can't use the R word. I'm 3 years out from even thinking about something like that. But you think about wild radish in every field, in every crop. It used to be a winter annual, right? Now it's a winter / somewhat summer / fall annual. It comes up about 10 months out of the year. Really fascinating. But if you look at gold, it is the #1 tool we use in onion production without a doubt. And that's where we're seeing some of the problems. But it's also critically important in transplant cold crops like broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower. Remember, if we have resistance to gold, the hypothesis is you'll have resistance to every other PPO chemistry, right? So if we have wild radish and snap beans, squash, watermelon, pepper, tomato, we could lose the activity of reflex. And then Chateau is used, hopefully, on most of our, at least plasticulture acreage, right? So this is very important. It's something you need to be aware of. It's something you need to be knowledgeable of, and it's something you need to be thinking about because we have no new chemistry coming. That doesn't mean I can't bring in new herbicides, because I may be able to find a cotton or corn or soybean herbicide and figure out how to use it in a vegetable crop. But the chemistry, the way the weed is controlled, there's nothing new, right? So we have to be very smart with the tools that we have. We've been screaming at agronomic growers for 20 years. Now I'm going to start screaming at you guys because our ability to keep the tools that we have is going to be the greatest challenge that at least I have fought in my career. So when you're thinking about a program, I use this with my agronomic guys. You guys, just through the production process, are already halfway there. You don't have to try nearly as hard, but you do have to try, and you have to think things through. I like to say you've got to be diversified, integrated. You've got to be smart. You wouldn't be a vegetable grower if you're not smart. You got to think of a systems approach. The theory that we're going to go out and apply one product, and that's the way we're going to survive, that doesn't work anymore with weed control, and you got to be timely. So up in the top left, you've got to be weed-free at planting. Half the battle in vegetable production, because the crop is so short, is making sure you're weed-free at planting. We have the tools, we have the equipment, we have tillage, we have options to do this. In almost every situation, there should be residual herbicides used at planting. Residual herbicides, if it's done right, will remove 90 to 95% of your most problematic weeds for the entire cropping system. And this is even a 120-day crop, much less a 70, 80, or 90-day crop. So that's important. You have to make timely programs. The one in the bottom center I highlight because this is, I think, directly tied to the purslane issues we're having and also the ragweed parthenium issues that we're having. If you're not familiar with ragweed parthenium, you need to Google it today. It's moving quickly, and it's going to be a tremendous problem as it spreads across our state. But you've got to control the weeds in those row middles. They build up populations, and then dealing with the population is what is problematic. We have worked very hard with our industry partners and our regulatory partners to bring lots of new row middle tools to help address purslane, pigweed, grasses, etc. The tools are there. You have to build maybe a hood or the equipment that you need to put it out, but the tools are there for you. And then on the right-hand side of that slide, just as important, and something Stormy and Babette have talked about forever, we can't do it with just herbicides. That's insanity because we're putting too much pressure on the herbicide. You got to be diversified. Of course, cover crops maybe doesn't fit vegetable production like it does agronomic production, but certainly tillage is a wonderful tool, and then always hand weeding of our most problematic pests is a very, very good investment of our resources. All right, so let me talk now just a little bit about regulations. So when you think about herbicide resistance, I would argue mostly that's on our growers now. It's your responsibility. You have the tools. It's a little bit on me in the industry. We need to keep bringing you tools and giving you a better toolbox, so I accept that. But once you get the toolbox, the way you use it and the system you implement, that's on you. And we're here to help you implement that tool where it is able to preserve it over time. Regulations is obviously a little more challenging, and I've actually got, Stormy mentioned it in the top left, there's the ESA. ESA, it just needs to be footprinted in your head now. That's the Endangered Species Act. That has influenced everything we've been doing for almost a year now. It will influence everything we're doing for a significant amount of time. The 7 herbicides down at the bottom are facing serious current regulatory challenges. Now, they're not all vegetable herbicides, so I'm just going to highlight a couple of the vegetable herbicides. But just so you know, this is not something that's going to happen in the future. This is something that's already happened. We have 11 counties in Georgia. You cannot use the herbicide Endless Duo. It is illegal to use it in 11 counties in Georgia. All right, that is the future of where we're going if we can't get ahead of this. And we all play a role in our potential to address this mighty challenge. So the first one I want to mention, because this is, for me, is atrazine. All right, atrazine is facing a significant challenge right now. Atrazine, of course, is always facing a significant regulatory challenge. The current decisions are being made. The comment period is over, but I still need your input because we've made multiple comments on the proposed mitigations for atrazine. The challenge with the atrazine is surface water runoff. All right, so the label is going to do away, or proposed label is going to do away with aerial applications. It's going to do away with applications on saturated soils, makes sense. It's going to require no application during rain or when a storm is likely to produce runoff. That makes sense. But this is what is important to me to communicate to you. The proposed label will take the maximum use rate to 2 pounds of active ingredient, from 2.5 to 2. If that's a problem for you, I need to hear from you today. It's not a problem for me in my programs, but if you've got something going on and you're using more than 2 pounds in your sweet corn or even in your field corn, we need to know it today because we're in the process of working with the EPA and regulators on this label. Also, this is an EPA slide, so I don't want to manipulate it. If you look at the picture where it's really colored, i.e. the corn producing states, they've got some significant challenges. Every highlighted color on that map is a watershed that has too much atrazine in it and has to have mitigation plans to solve this problem. So the EPA is currently developing mitigation plans to prevent atrazine from running off the field. Why is this important to you? Number one, we do have a few spots in our state where we will have to run mitigation plans. But what is important to you is this is the concept, this is the procedure that they're going to use for mitigation plans for the next 1,200 active ingredients. So if you have ideas, you have theories of how once we get a pesticide on the field, we can keep it on that field, we need to hear from you now. It's now. We have 3 to 5 years to get a lot of things right for the processes to run for the next 15 to 20 years. All right, so let us hear you, me, Stormy, Babesh, any of us, let us hear you. Obviously, if you think about mitigation plans, I know I'm being live streamed. Some of the mitigation plans by the EPA simply will not work. They're not economically sustainable, but that's fine. Let's throw them out. Let's discuss them scientifically. Let's figure out what does work. The 2 that will work for sure in the state of Georgia, and let me point out, depending on where you're at, you may have to have 1 mitigation plan. You may have to have 4, right? You may have to have 4. That is going to be a mighty challenge and something that we're working on. But to reduce pesticide runoff, cover crops are monumental. Tons of data out of Tifton that are wonderful. We're using that data. Again, I know cover crops don't necessarily fit in vegetables like they do agronomic crops, but one that you can use and one that will actually help you is number 2. So if you go out and you put a residual herbicide and you irrigate prior to the first rain, you know, 1/4 inch, 1/3 of inch, 1/2 inch, something like that, where there's no product leaving that field, it will reduce significant pesticide runoff if we get a heavy rain following that. All right? That also reduces herbicide injury, splashing, etc. So it's a good cultural practice for herbicide use, but it's also a good stewardship practice to keep the pesticide in the field. Doesn't matter if it's an insecticide, a fungicide, or herbicide. That's a good practice for you to implement. We're going to try to get that as one of our mitigation plans tools. Let me give you an update on dactyl. This is like one in a lifetime type of event here. And you may say, well, we don't use a lot of dactyl. We really don't use a lot of Dacthal other than onion seed beds, but I hope before I can retire, I can have a seeded onion weed management program that is actually effective, and Dacthal will be a part of that. So I'm really hoping the manufacturer of Dacthal, AMVAC, and the EPA can work this out. But currently what is going on, the manufacturer has not supplied the scientific data required by the EPA for many years. I've never heard of that happening before. The EPA has performed an intent to suspend the product, and the manufacturer is currently carrying EPA to court. All right, so I have no idea where this is going to end up. I would encourage you to let your AMVAC people know, hey, that product's important to us. We need you to get the science that the EPA needs to make the right decisions. That's my take on it. The last one I want to specifically talk about, because this one's really fascinating. Of course, glyphosate's the most widely used pesticide on planet Earth. To walk you through the challenges that we're having and kind of what Stormy talked about, this really sets us up. Last year now, February the 3rd, the EPA published a glyphosate interim decision. They do that with pretty much every pesticide when they go through re-registration. Basically, here's where we're at, here's the science we have, here's potential changes or mitigations to protect the environment, to protect the applicator, to protect the consumer, etc. On March 20th of that year, the decision was challenged in the U.S. Court of Appeals in the Ninth Circuit Court. On June the 17th, the Ninth Circuit Court vacated the human health portion and brought the endangered species into discussion. And they gave them from June to October to address both the ESA and the human health exposure component. Now let me tell you, if we had every weed scientist in the United States working on ESA for 5 years, we could not address ESA and glyphosate. And the courts gave the EPA a few months. Just last week, I was telling Stormy, the Ninth Circuit Court got one of his insecticides. They have 180 days to address it. There's no way they're going to address ESA in 180 days. We have to get our pesticides out of the court systems. We have nobody with any scientific knowledge whatsoever in these court systems making decisions. We have to make the process where the scientists are making the decisions, not our court systems. All right, so the last thing I'm going to say before we get into some label changes is we do have a pilot program. We have an Endangered Species Act team in Georgia that is organized. It includes UGA, the Department of Agriculture, Fish and Wildlife. My first opportunity to work with Fish and Wildlife. It has been amazing, absolutely amazing. Region 4 EPA, US EPA, and most importantly, we have farmers on our team. The Georgia ESA pilot program is currently almost a year into working on Enlist Duo. Believe it or not, my team is working with the frosted and reticulated salamander, and we're trying to determine how that interacts with our farmers and our farmer fields. That's the only way we're going to bring Enlist Duo back on those 11 counties where you can't use it. And then we're going to roll into atrazine and glyphosate, which are going to be monumental challenges. Now, it's taken me a year on Enlist Duo, and we're not there yet, and that's the easiest one we will do. There are 1,200 active ingredients that have to be addressed, and this is going to happen fast. So I'm telling you, this is a challenge of all challenges. A year ago, I saw no light at the end of the tunnel. I see a light. A lot of good people working together to accomplish good things. The light's in Tifton, right? It's a long ways away, but I do see some positives that are coming out of this. And in the end run, let's hope we still have our tools. We're stewarding these tools. We're protecting the environment. We're protecting our applicators. And we're protecting our consumers better than ever, which you know we have to do with the perception of pesticides. That's a no-give, and we are the ones that should lead the approach. All right, so let's talk about some label changes and what's going on right now. All right, now we have talked about glyphosate for like 5 years, right? I know historically glyphosate never had residual activity. We've showed you all that data. I am not going to do that again today. I'm sure you're applauding. You don't have to hear it again today. I will remind you we have new labels out that will guide you on using glyphosate, still a critical tool for us in vegetables, without the residual activity of that herbicide hurting you. I will highlight transplanting into bare ground is very sensitive to a glyphosate application. You have significant plant back intervals and guidelines to follow. Make sure to do that. And if you're planting on second, third, fourth crop plastic and you hit an old hole, remember you hit an old hole, we might have a 3 to 8x level of product in that plant hole, so the residual activity is significant. So all our recommendations have been updated, new labels have been updated. If you need that information, just get it from your county agent. We developed all of that in Georgia. all the information that drives that label in Georgia. So we believe if you follow that, you will be safe with that. Now, what about glyphosate? I've also been talking about glyphosate for a couple years. I thought we would get a label in 2022. We did not get it, but I got a text this morning that says we're hoping to submit it. We, meaning the manufacturer, is hoping to submit it to the Department of Agriculture at the end of this month. This is a very, very important tool for us. It, again, will require specific use patterns. There may be some people that are experimenting a little bit now, but it is, again, similar to glyphosate. It supposedly doesn't have residual activity, but in our cultural and production practices, it has a lot of residual activity, and it can kill the crap out of your crop if you don't know what you're doing. All right, so hold tight for the labels. As soon as we get the labels, there'll be a state label. It'll be written very specifically. I love the label. I've been able to participate in the label. It'll tell you exactly what you need to do. Extremely important for Morning Glory, and that ragweed parthenium I was talking about, this will be one of the 2 tools that are absolutely essential for our ability to manage that pest. Comes off of plastic really well with a little bit of washing. I think we know what we need to know about this tool. We just need a label, and hopefully we'll have it prior to spring production. I mentioned this last year. This happened at the end of last year. I just want to highlight again row middle labels. We've got a ton of prowl or satellite hydrocap row middle labels. Obviously, prowl needs some rainfall or irrigation pretty quick, so it doesn't necessarily fit for every production practice we got. But these tools are fairly economical in the scheme of what we're doing in vegetable production. They're really good on purslane. They're really good on pigweed. They're really good on grasses. That's 3 of your top 5 most problematic pests. Nothing on nutsedge. But you need to be adding these tools in and getting them spaced in the row middle application of your system. I'll also mention, of course, they had to complicate it a little bit. The prowl label also has green onions, while the satellite hydrocap also has some of the leafy brassica greens, right? They're not, the labels are not exactly the same. That's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. All of our recommendations are updated. These handouts are updated. These are good tools. You can use these very easily without hurting your crop. That may not bring 100% control of anything, but if we add it in a systems approach, it's very important for resistance management, and it's very important for 3 of the top 5 most problematic weeds that you're dealing with in the Southeast. Now, one thing is interesting. So if you think back, you know, I had the best of the best in training, there's no doubt about it, but I was trained glyphosate has no residual. All right, that's wrong. I was trained glyphosate has no residual. That's wrong. I was trained Treflan and prowl are basically the same. Well, dang it, that's wrong. All right, so I want to share with you something I've been saying. I can't believe I'm working with a product as old as I am. But I've been doing a little bit of work because wild radish is a huge problem. So here's a little bit of wild radish response to prowl in the yellow bar. And in both, this is 2 different studies you're looking at. Prowl is at 2 pints, and that's H2O. At 2 pints, and then Treflan in this one is at 1 pint. I have no control of wild radish versus what, 80–85% control with prowl. That's insane. All right, I had to repeat it for myself, so I increased the rate of Treflan to 1.5 pints, and I'm still doing really good with prowl. Just yesterday, I'm on the onion farm. Now I'm putting prowl and Treflan out everywhere I go. I got about 80% control of primrose with prowl. I got about a 0% control out of Treflan. Right, so wow, there's so much to do even with the older chemistry. We'll go back and look at this. But this is something I want to highlight. We have to be very careful with, because the one thing that every one of you have always said is Treflan's safer on my crop. It absolutely is safer on your crop. I'd rather not damage the crop and get a little less weed control, right? So I'm not saying we need to move to prowl, right? But we need to figure out what the prowl does with some of these other weeds, and maybe we can figure out how to use it without damaging our crop. Like, I'm not saying go put prowl on some of these sensitive seeded crops. Treflan's the one we need to stay with. But there are differences that we need to explore and a lot of work to do. All right, so this one is labeled. It's probably going to catch you most of you off guard. So last year I told you we were working on a product called bicyclopyrone. We've been doing it for 5 to 7 years, got a ton of data. I feel really comfortable with it. It is actually labeled for use in watermelon. You could use it in 2023. I will kind of highlight my thought process. So I only got 1 label up here. I'm sure the Syngenta guys got some in their booth. You can go by and see them. But currently the application is, you're generally going to be up around 3.5 ounces of product per acre, so you want to get that rate right. And we can apply it before transplanting watermelons or post-directed. We don't want any foliar contact. I know this is a tiny slide. I borrowed this slide from Syngenta. It's yellowing and chlorosis. It doesn't usually slow down, but we don't want any foliar contact. So pre-plant type of application, or I actually think, again, as I'm pushing you to do row middles, I think it actually might be a row middle fit. Now, this is my information. Label has no mention of mulch. I don't know why they did that. We've done mulch studies every year. There's plenty of data to have mulch on there. It's coming off the mulch. I'm hoping Syngenta will address that maybe with a state label or something where we can advise you more effectively on mulch production. Watermelon tolerance, again, is good. It's really good, as long as you don't drift or get a foliar contact. Carry over on the label. Let me say that again. Carry over restrictions on the label are problematic. I don't know that that means carryover is problematic. That means we probably don't have a clue, right? So you need to look at that. That's going to prohibit your use on many, many acres. And then before you get too excited, you need to stop by and see Syngenta today and ask them about the price tag. I am not going to share that with you. That's none of my business. But they are very proud of the product. With that said, we need every tool that we can get. Right, and I want to work with them, and I want to thank them and every other manufacturer for working to bring us new tools. We need them. We'll figure out how to use it at some point, some way. Now, where I'm struggling with is I really like our current watermelon program. Man, if you're on plastic culture, small bed plastic culture, and you're putting metam under that plastic, that's a home run if you're doing that. We're broadcasting a little bit of Curbit. Some of you make a mistake. Remember, Sonoland's not labeled, Curbit's labeled. And we put a little reflex and a little Symbar in there. We broadcast that, wash it off. That's outstanding. That's outstanding. I can't bring anything to that with this product. It's that good. Now, if you're not using reflex or you're not using Symbar, maybe it will bring something to you. This product in weed control actually reminds me a lot of Symbar. It's not phenomenal on anything, but it's pretty daggum good on everything. So on the left is 2 locations of pigweed control, Texas millet. Morning Glory I'll highlight. We need help with Morning Glory. There's no doubt this might be the one. I was hoping it would be a home run. It is certainly not a home run. Their label even claims partial control on most species. Radish is actually pretty good on one location that I've got. So good, again, I think it's a great tool. Where does it fit? I think you do what you normally do up front. Then you go in there with that row middle application and you consider putting this product in with the yellow herbicide, maybe some Sandil, what have you, as a row middle application. But for 2023, what I would encourage you to do is stop by that Syngenta booth, say, hey, let's try a little bit of a field here or there. Let's experiment with it. I think that's what they want. That's definitely what I want as we learn more about this tool that, again, we're thankful to have any new tool in vegetable production. So I wanted to just highlight, because I got a ton of problems last year with people putting dual either over top of plastic or over top of watermelons. I will remind you, I showed you this last year, dual does not come off the plastic like you think it does. All right, so you go out and put a 1/2 inch or 1 inch, you do not get all the herbicide off the plastic. This is the amount of dual, and I've also got warrant on here, that is left after 1 inch of irrigation. So 15% of the dual is still sitting on the plastic. Well, a little bit comes off all along, but remember, when it runs in that hole, it's usually 3 to 8 times of what you applied. So even if it's only 10 or 15% of the product left on the plastic, if 8 times that ends up in your hole, guess what happens to your watermelons? I stun them every single time. So again, row middle application for dual and watermelon is what I would strongly encourage you to do. Don't contact the mulch. Don't go over top of the melons. I just added that. Also, I'm glad I added this slide because I totally forgot. In 2022 is the first time, Symbar's always come off the mulch for me, but I've always put a 1/2 inch of irrigation. I went in and did Symbar work on mulch at a 1/4 inch. It does not take it all off. I actually stunted my melons, watermelons, 15 to 20%. So if you're using Symbar, make sure you get that 1/2 inch to get that Symbar off. And then it's bulletproof, it's wonderful. But do not skimp on the washing of the mulch with these products. So one I have to admit I have not gotten you, and it's totally on me. Last year I said, hey, I think we'll have a reflex sweet potato by sweet potato planting time. And I actually messed up because the letter I wrote, I put reflex for sweet potato and eggplant together. Eggplant has run into a little snafu. at the EPA, it's delayed, and when it delayed the eggplant, it delayed the sweet potato. So what I'm gonna try to do, hopefully work with our manufacturer, rewrite the letter for sweet potato, and just get you a reflex sweet potato before the year's up. Again, I don't think it brings a lot to the ball game because you want to use Valor or Chateau. It's a better product in my opinion, but the reflex would bring you some yellow nutsedge suppression, and you would use it just like you would traditionally use reflex unless the label changes without my knowledge. Few last thoughts kind of all over the board, just kind of crazy stuff that may, hopefully something will help you somewhere. I wanted to mention, one of the things I want to do with the final few years of my career is I actually want to document the value of a herbicide in vegetable production. There's nobody doing this politically speaking. This would be a powerful piece of information to have the discussion of do we or don't we need these tools and how valuable are they. The other side of that is while I'm doing that is I also try to develop the best organic program on the planet, right? So that's how you get the value is you take the tool out. All right, but at the same time, I want to develop the best organic program. And I tell you, I wanted to share this, and I know we're in a pesticide update, but the tine weeder, at least in the system study that we've got it going on right now, is a very effective tool if you do about 8 things right. But you can do all 8 things right. All right, so first of all, let me caveat. This was a fall-winter study, not a spring-summer Palmer amaranth growing 2 to 4 inches kind of thing. It's weeds are moving slower, everything's happening slower, gives you more time to be timely. So let me caveat that. We'll try again in the spring. But this is actually right after we just transplanted broccoli. I think you got to transplant. But if you have the ability to transplant these tools, you have to have 0 weeds up at transplanting. You set that transplant real quick, and then you start running this tool, and you keep running this tool. We're running it 2 to 3 times a week. But I'm going to tell you what, it's working pretty daggum good taking wild radish out of broccoli, which is kind of daggum cool. All right, so I just wanted to mention that's kind of an interesting thing that we're doing on the side, and something if you're an organic producer or you have an organic part of your operation, you might want to look into this. Now again, if you're 3 days late, you're sunk. The other thing that is fascinating that we're doing, and I've talked about this the last couple of years, but now we've done it in cold crops. I even did a hemp project looking at transplant method and its relationship to herbicide injury. And this is really cool. You know, traditionally we have done the whole poke hand transplant method, right? Whether it's bare ground, whether it's in plasticulture or whatever have you, we run the hole punch. It punches the hole, we come in. The top left, you'll see that blue, that's a dye. And what I'm doing with that dye is I'm showing you where that dye goes when you do the hole punch method, right? You basically push the dye all around the root ball. So regardless of the herbicide that you put out, you now have that herbicide all around the root ball. Some herbicides were okay, some herbicides we are not okay, right? And the bottom left is just the mechanical transplanting process. I'm using it mostly for cold crops, but I did plant my hemp with it, and it worked really, really well. And on your right, you can see the difference of the different methods. I actually do both methods in the same herbicide plot so I can compare the 2 practices. And what I'm seeing is I'm seeing so much more tolerance with the mechanical transplanter, which makes sense because I'm able to slide the root ball under the herbicide. I'm not seeing better weed control now, so be clear about that, but I am seeing much better tolerance. But what this does is it complicates my life a little bit, because if we were to move this way or move that way in a crop, for example, we use goal in broccoli transplants. Well, my goal rate is limited because I'm planning on you sticking goal all around the root ball. Well, if you're not sticking goal around the root ball, I can use more goal. All right, so I get better weed control. Or maybe I have a product that I'm not comfortable bringing to you because I don't have enough tolerance. Lo and behold, if we change the way we plant, we may be able to bring you tools. Right, so something for you to think about. I thought this was pretty cool. This is from that study, and this is actually glyphosate residual now. The top is the mechanical transplanter. The bottom left, I should have took a picture earlier, but this is actually a manipulated plant. We actually got real creative, and we kept the herbicide from contacting any part of the plant except for the root ball. Because I needed to know, is glyphosate moving through the root ball? So the bottom left is glyphosate moving through the root ball. The bottom right is the exact same thing, except for glyphosate's now moving through the root ball, it's moving through the stem, and it's splashing on the leaves. all right? So it's really a neat process, but the top again is that mechanical processing. So it's clearly the root ball and the stem that are taking that product up the most, without a doubt. So again, I thought it was pretty cool. I got to talk about purslane. You guys are wearing me out with purslane. I think purslane, some of you are going to be insulted, but I think purslane could be the poster child for a sound weed management program. If you control purslane, then you're doing what you need to be doing. Now, you might say, well, what is he talking about? Residuals are the key to controlling purslane. If you're trying to control purslane after it's up, you've already lost. You've already lost. You got to keep it from coming up. But it's really, really cool. Look at all the tools that we have with the residual activity control purslane. I'm not sure there's any crop that we grow. I'm sure there's one or two, and you'll get me on it. But there's not many crops that you're going to grow that we do not have the tools to control purslane. All right, and you say, well, dang it, I put it out, but it eventually comes up 3 to 4 weeks later. That's where I want to remind you. This looks complicated. It's really not that complicated. It does not matter what crop you're in. But the concept of overlapping residuals is the key to managing purslane, pigweed, spiderwort, anything else you're doing. So if you look at the top left, I don't know if I can do as good as Babesh. Oh, I can't. If you look at the top left, this red line, that's where we put herbicide A out the day we planted. That second is more active. As soon as you activate it, it's more active than any other time it will be. So on that red line, that's that herbicide breaking down. Okay? So we put a herbicide out, it's going to degrade. That blue line is the point where purslane will come through that effective herbicide. So what you have to do is before herbicide A breaks to the point that we're going to have escapes, you overlap it with herbicide B. So again, that's like where I was talking about, we put Reflex and Symbar up for up in watermelon. We want to come in the road middle with some Treflan or some Prowl and maybe some of these other tools. And you keep doing that process. You won't need to do it 3 times in produce. We got to do it that much or more in cotton, but you won't have to do that much. If you understand that concept, you don't want to see the dang weed in produce. You got too much money invested. And we can usually do it with less injury with these tools than the tools that cause damage post-emergence wise. So again, I'll remind you there are a few tools to kill it once it's up, but really what you need to do is go with as high a rate as is legally acceptable with glyphosate. 5 days later, come back with paraquat. All right? Some days it works, some days it doesn't, but that's the best. But you don't need to get in that situation. All right, a couple more slides. I'm going to finish on time. A couple of additional slides, and then I'm going to be quiet. Top dog, still nutsedge. Nothing coming to help us with nutsedge. We have to continue to improve. I think we've improved. We have a lot of growers now that understand you're going to have to manage this pest year-round. And if you're in plasticulture and you figure out how many dollars this one pest is costing you because it influences the fumigant program that you're running, then you know it's worth managing it 365 days a year. Traditionally, I've always recommended you want to rotate a disking and a Roundup. If you can add Sandia in, don't have a carryover problem, etc. It fits, it's labeled on 3 to 4 week intervals. Now again, you wouldn't want to make but one Sandia application, period. We can make sequential Roundup applications, and we did. Now why do we want to go on 3 to 4 week intervals? It goes back to the biology of the pest. 3 weeks after you see nutsedge coming up in the summer, it's producing tubers below the ground. So that's why we want to roll on 3 week intervals. Why do we want to use glyphosate? Because glyphosate goes to the tuber. I know you're not excited about what you see up top. This don't work, but it's moving to the tubers and it's reducing the viability of the tubers. Then when we disc it up, those tubers can't survive. All right? It's hard. I know it's hard, but it's the best thing I think we've got right now. But I do want to say, and again, you got to watch the residual. In the past, I always said you got to watch the residual of Sandia, but now you got to watch the residual of glyphosate too, especially if you're making sequential applications. But I do want to say we're doing some pretty neat stuff, I think, with Eptam. So Eptam is really good on pigweed. It's also good on grasses, and it's pretty good on nutsedge. And what we're trying to do, and the manufacturer is doing a lot of the work, and I'm excited to work with them. What we're trying to do is, okay, if we have an interval during, say, a month or 2 months, can we go in and put Eptam into this disking Roundup theory and improve our nutsedge control that lasts for 6 months or lasts for a year? right? So I think we can for weed management. We just got to learn more about how quick you can plant crop X, A, B, C, D back behind an uptown application, right? We know some of that because it's labeled in some crops. The limitation, of course, we'd have to have irrigation. So in our plasticulture fields where we're doing all drip, that's not going to help us much. But on other land, it would be something that would be very, I think, at least at this point, possibly very beneficial. I'm excited what I saw this year anyway. So just so you know, we'll continue to try to improve the nut sedge scale, but it's going to come down to you again, 365 management, kind of like Stormy's pepper weevils or whatever. We've got to be thinking about nut sedge every second of every day because it's cost us a fortune. And we got no new tools coming. There'll be nothing to come to help us with that. Last 2 slides, and then I'm going to be quiet. We have a tremendous number of challenges if you want to keep using pesticides. We have to work together, and that means every single one of us. If you're a farmer, you're the key. You're the one that makes the decision to steward or not steward these tools. We want to work with you to make you better at what you do, bring you new tools, bring you new ways to use these tools more safely for you, for the environment, and for the consumer, which we know you won't. We know that. But it requires everybody working together. And we've got to address this because the challenges are mighty. And the last thing I want to mention, because we're in a vegetable conference, most of the tools that I have talked about today have run through IR4. If you're not familiar with IR4, you need to be. I noticed there are 2 posters right outside the door. Take a minute. They are the ones that help facilitate getting the tools to you. Now, with that said, we don't get anywhere without the manufacturer. We don't get anywhere without the EPA. We don't get anywhere without the Department of Agriculture. So again, it's a true teams approach. The last thing I want to mention is the funding for most of what I shared today, as well as funding part of our ESA program, comes from the Commodity Commission, the Vegetable Commodity Commission. So again, you as a farmer are funding what we are doing. We appreciate your support because it allows us to do some really cool stuff. Any questions or comments? And in case Stormy was not paying attention, I finished early. So if there are any questions or comments, I'll be glad to try to address them. Again, don't forget the handouts. If you want, you're welcome to take a couple if you think they'll help you.